Welcome back to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik, where we bring you news, politics, and culture without the red and blue treatment. I'm John Kiriakou, here with Michelle Whitty. The economy grew at a tepid 1.1%, according to numbers released by the Commerce Department this morning. This is exactly what the Biden administration and the Federal Reserve had hoped for, as they continue to raise interest rates to bring inflation down. But the economy appears to be heading into recession. And that's just in time for the presidential election.
Still very confused at this.
And speaking of the election, a poll released last night by Fox News shows that, as we predicted, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is putting up some serious numbers against President Biden. The nationwide poll of registered Democrats shows Biden at 62%, Kennedy at 19%, and Marianne Williamson at 9%. No incumbent president has put up such weak numbers within his own party since Kennedy's uncle, Ted Kennedy, challenged President Jimmy Carter in the 1980 Democratic primaries. In the meantime, the House yesterday passed a measure that would permit a one-time increase in the debt ceiling in exchange for a 10% cut in non-military spending, a proposal that is dead on arrival in the democratically controlled Senate. 4 House Republicans voted no, along with every Democrat. The measure sets up a fight with the Biden administration over the debt ceiling and will lead to the brinkmanship that literally everybody in Washington has been predicting. Coinbase, the world's largest cryptocurrency trading platform, has filed a federal lawsuit against the Securities and Exchange Commission, asking a federal judge to force the regulator to share its answer to Coinbase's July 2022 petition on whether existing securities rulemaking processes could or should be extended to the crypto industry. You would think it would be the other way around, that the SEC would be suing Coinbase, but that's not the case. The SEC has warned Coinbase that it could expect some sort of enforcement action, but has not told the exchange what that might be related to or how they could avoid it. Former President Donald Trump has lost an emergency appeal to block former Vice President Mike Pence from testifying about their direct private conversations related to Trump's efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Trump could appeal to the Supreme Court, but has not indicated that he would do so. Pence's testimony could be important in the Georgia investigation into Trump's efforts to, quote, find, unquote, enough votes to flip that state's electoral votes to him. And Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who is expected to announce his candidacy for the Republican presidential nomination in the coming few weeks, may have bitten off a little bit more than he can chew by trying to take on Disney. The entertainment giant yesterday filed a blistering federal lawsuit accusing DeSantis of, quote, initiating a targeted campaign of political retaliation, unquote, for having the gall to speak out against the so-called Don't Say Gay law. DeSantis has continually ratcheted up pressure on Disney by stripping it of its semi-autonomy and by canceling its tax incentives. Steve Grumbine is the founder and the CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and he's the host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory, and we're always glad to have him. Welcome back, Steve.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for joining us. Let's start with these new economic numbers. We've talked with you about these kinds of issues on the show for a very long time. The economy grew at a slow rate of 1.1% in the first quarter of the calendar year. It was 2.2% a year earlier. This is exactly what the White House and the Fed had been hoping for, because they believe that slower growth or even recession will snuff out inflation. Even if that happens, though, and the New York Times is saying this morning that it likely won't, the country is likely to be pushed into a recession just in time for the election. So, in your view, what's the appropriate policy here? And perhaps a loaded question, is the toll in human misery through unemployment worth the reduction in inflation?
Yeah. So the unfortunate thing here is that there's this thing I call, and I guess it's really not just I call, but it's institutionalized beliefs and knowledge that certain things must be done to do other things, whatever that might be. And in this particular case, the question is inflation. So the institutionalized playbook says we've got to raise interest rates, we've got to cut spending, and we've got to bring on layoffs because the only way they know to balance the economy and take away these inflationary pressures is to, in fact, create maximum instability in the consumers' lives where they begin to save their money versus spend their money. And by doing this, it creates a slowdown and thus, by extension, makes sellers of goods believe that they need to lower their prices to continue making sales. And so that's the idea here anyway behind their approach. And of course, it's not a real thing. I mean, eventually, if you make life so hard on people through austerity, of which, if you follow me on Twitter, you know my handle is austerity is murder. Mm-hmm. You know that you can create such unlivable conditions for people, and it trickles to the bottom, right? That it's absolutely immoral, it's absolutely unnecessary, and it's the wrong prescription. But because it's so entrenched in the finance sector, in the political sector, and all the standard textbooks that guys and gals go to school to learn, and they come back into industry, and this is the only thing they know. And so this is the plan. It's very wrong. It's absolutely unnecessary. One of the things that is not spoken of, unfortunately, except in certain circles, people like Isabella Weber, who is a brilliant professor and also a wonderful author, she posits that a lot of this is 100% price gouging. And so, taking away people's ability to buy things, obviously the way to solve that is price controls. The way to solve that is to penalize on the sales side as opposed to the consumption side. The way to deal with that is to produce penalties for corporations found to be gouging during these events. And on the labor side, the answer to this is a federal job guarantee to ensure that no matter what happens in the economy, the ebbs and flows, there's always a living wage job there available for anyone who wants one or needs one to pivot out of private sector. So their approach is a sledgehammer to an anthill or a howitzer to an anthill, or you come up with your analogy, a nuclear bomb to an anthill. It's bad because what happens is the technique that they use by raising interest rates simultaneously further insulates the rich from the impacts of these decisions, because that's free money to them. Right. Those interest rate hikes are free money to them. So if you look at the economy and you just look at where the deficit spending into the economy is coming from, because that's what's keeping us out of recession, is interestingly the interest payments made to these companies. That's the only reason we're not already in recession. So go figure.
Steve, our contacts in the Kennedy campaign have been telling us for a week at least to expect a poll that had Kennedy at around 20%. We've said that on the show a couple times.
I was surprised.
I'll be honest with you. I was actually surprised too.
20% is less.
I thought that they were overstating it. Yeah. And sure enough, this Fox News poll came out last night that has Kennedy at 19%. Joe Biden at a tepid 62% for an incumbent president. That's incredibly low. That's about where Jimmy Carter was in 1980, and it's almost to the number where Lyndon Johnson was in 1968. This is exactly what RFK was hoping the numbers would show. Tell us how important you think this poll is, and is it just an announcement bump, or are Democrats really looking for an alternative to Joe Biden?
Well, let's go back to Bernie Sanders' run in 2015.
Yep.
And Bruce Spiva fighting tooth and nail in court for the DNC to say that they had absolutely zero responsibility to run a primary, much less to support the outcome of that primary. These are primary challengers, okay? And the DNC has already said point blank, we're not going to do debates. There's going to be no party debates whatsoever. So you're left with social media, you're left with whatever other avenues. Everyone that is left of, Ronald Reagan wants someone other than Joe Biden.
Yeah.
And that was before he even got slammed through with the manufacturing consent. So I think most people really, truly cannot stand Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And I think that this is a very indicative poll, even though I do think it's probably an announcement bump. But I also think it speaks to the grave displeasure a lot of people have, especially within the anti-war left and within the anti-austerity left, that, Biden has said a lot of things. He said, we're going to try and get rid of student debt. And then all of a sudden, out of the blue, it's just $10,000. And then he's not really doing the big fight because groups like the Debt Collective provided him with the actual executive order he could have signed into law right away, no problem, no fuss, no fuss, and literally wiped out everything. He didn't do that. And he didn't provide Medicare for all. He didn't even have the debate. He allowed the people in East Palestine to go without meaningful health care or relocation or any kind of other federal support there. I mean, every step through this man's, process, if you will, he has let a huge segment of the people that should have supported or would have supported him if it was just a, vote blue no matter who kind of framework. And he's really, really punted. So a guy like, RFK, who, I don't support him. Let me just be fair. I don't support him for a number of reasons. But regardless, a guy like RFK Jr. that comes through the door with the anti-vax skepticism, with the Bitcoin friendly, with all the other things that kind of speak to the economic right of the left, if you will, within that libertarian space. Mm-hmm. A guy like him has got a natural opportunity there to get a big bump just based on current events and surveillance and, a lot of the different things that speak to that segment. Marianne Williamson, here's another one that, as soon as the pot gets hot, she'll do what most Democrats do, and that is simply support the candidate.
Fall into line.
And people, right. So to me, it's a bump and certainly shows, it tells you a story. What that story is, I think, is left to be determined. But it definitely tells a story of a people that are not that into Joe Biden. Mm-hmm. And, as much as he said nothing would fundamentally change, I think a lot of people are scratching their head and saying, gosh, I almost wish that were true, because this has gotten worse in a lot of ways. The Republicans certainly haven't helped, but that's always going to be the case. There's always going to be Republicans. There's always going to be a parliamentarian. There's always going to be a Cory Booker to Deep Six, a pharmaceutical bill. There'll always be somebody there to thwart it, the rotating villain, they say.
Yeah.
So it doesn't shock me at all that RFK Jr. has got this big bump.
I want to ask you about Tucker Carlson, too. He lost his job at Fox News a couple of days ago. 3-4 days ago, whatever it was. He was silent until last night, and then he released a short 2-minute video on Twitter. He didn't necessarily lash out at Fox News like I might have expected him to. He didn't do that. His video had millions and millions of views within just minutes. And there's talk that maybe after a short period of time off, he's going to be sort of the Joe Rogan of news, where he can go to any platform he wants and he can instantly monetize every word that comes out of his mouth. To me, that leads to a bigger question, though. As soon as Fox announced that they were parting ways with him, Fox's ratings tanked and Newsmax's skyrocketed. Now they're talking about Tucker going on YouTube or Rumble or Telegram or whatever. Are we entering a period now where the networks just aren't as important anymore as they once were? That people are going to get their news from wherever they want to get it. They're going to get their news from the people with whom they agree on the issues, and whether they have to seek that out on different platforms, they're willing to do that. What do you think?
I think you just said it. I think you said it all. In an internet space that has alternatives, people are not. And it's funny. I'm going to go back retro momentarily. I remember sitting there when the Washington Post would come out. And I lived in the DC area at the time, and I was young, but there was the Washington Star.
Right.
And then later the Washington
Until
Times.
1982.
That's right. There were very little choices for your news, period. There was no internet. There wasn't even discussion boards. So you would watch one or two network channels. There was 3 channels that would fight to the death for ABC, CBS, and NBC.
Yeah.
There wasn't even a Fox. You know what I mean? So as you think about the way media has always been somewhat concentrated, there is a little bit of a disheveling period that we're in, because I remember hearing from my parents sitting in front of the one black and white TV or in front of the one radio station back when they had the UHF versus VHF, the bunny ears and all that good stuff.
Absolutely.
And everyone heard the same story. Do you know what I mean? Like, so when you walked out, it was easy to either be A, proud to be an American, or B, pissed as hell and not proud to be an American or whatever. And so now you're looking at it, and we're kind of going through this post-truth, that's just your opinion kind of time cycle in American history, and really, I guess, kind of global history. And, I do think that people are having like an aversion or a reflexive yuck factor for the amount of control that the networks have put on us. I mean, I do not watch network news, period. And I only watch the occasional snippet on YouTube just so I know what they're saying.
Yeah.
But I don't watch it and I found myself to be happier in general.
Yeah.
I found myself to be a much healthier person as a result of not doing it. And I think a lot of people are choosing to do that. And that's why alternative outlets are getting the opportunity. And that's why someone like Tucker, is going to be able to monetize right out the gate, simply because even if I totally disagree with the man, he's got that Jordan Peterson, alt-right, Joe Rogan kind of thing going on, that speaks to people. And in a world, think about this, in a world where people paint Joe Biden as a communist, if you know anything about this stuff, you know how laughable that is. But in a world where those kinds of people exist, and they do, sadly, it's no wonder that they rush over there thinking that that's the sanity, that they're running away from from crushing communism or whatever.
Yes.
And they just scoot around. It's such a post-truth society that absolutely nothing surprises me.
Indeed, man. Joe Biden, this may not be the most important question in the world, but it's kind of intriguing to me. Joe Biden yesterday was caught with a cheat sheet detailing a reporter's question before he called on her. The cheat sheet included the name of the Los Angeles Times reporter, a transliteration of the pronunciation of her name, and then the question itself. The conservative media have jumped on this. They're saying it's a major gaffe. It proves that Biden's not up to being president. He can't even remember the name of, one of the most important White House journalists. Is this much ado about nothing, or do you think that this is part of that whole age-related thing that seems to be becoming a campaign issue for Joe Biden?
Yeah, let me just say this. You already know this, but for those that don't, hear me and know, I am not a Joe Biden supporter in any way, shape, or form.
Right.
So that said, Joe Biden having anything up there to ensure that he doesn't not only embarrass himself, but also maybe even, come off as rude to the individual. I don't see any problem with that whatsoever. I call that preparation, actually. So for me, it's much ado about nothing. But remember, for a group of people that think Joe Biden's a communist,
right,
this is a huge deal. He's, I think honestly, though, we can pretty much chalk this one up to extremely partisan. And unfortunately, there's a left out there, a pseudo left anyway, that will support some of these tropes that are, again, I have to say it out loud. I hate to do it, but I'm not a Joe Biden guy. I'm not here to defend him. That said, I find some of the opportunism, even from some of my compadres on the left, to be a bit curious.
Yeah.
And so something like this to me is much ado about nothing. But when you when you think Joe Biden's the second coming of Che Guevara, woo, you've got some work to do there, buddy.
House Republican Steve voted last night, or it wasn't even last night, it was yesterday afternoon, on a debt ceiling bill that doesn't have a prayer of becoming law. All House Republicans but 4 voted in favor of it. 1 Republican and 3 Democrats missed the vote, which is really the only thing that allowed it to pass in the first place. Now the Senate will come up with its own bill. So I'll ask you the same question that I asked a guest yesterday. Why don't the House and Senate just sit at the negotiating table and come up with a doggone deal? This is something that they're going to have to do anyway in conference committee. So why not save the American people the headache and do it now? And in the end, do you see the Biden administration agreeing to any meaningful cuts in social spending? That's what the Republicans are demanding.
So you asked several questions in there, and
Yeah.
I'll do my best to answer because they're all very important, and I don't want to give any one of them short shrift. The truth of the matter is this. The reason why there's even a Senate has always been to block the will of the people.
That's exactly right.
It's literally the only reason the Senate exists. So to ask why they don't come together and do something all in the name of helping the American people just seems like it answered itself. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of, it's a self-fulfilling answer. But that said, I really do believe part of this is manufacturing consent. I believe that Joe Biden has always been an austerian. He's always been somebody who has wanted to reduce the deficit, pay down the debt, cut this, cut that, cut the other. His recent come the Jesus moment, so to speak, has been, dealing now with inflation. And because these guys are incompetent at explaining inflation and they allow the stupid, ridiculous tropes about printing money causing inflation to stand, because of this insanity, they lose the very footing that they could have to defeat these kind of tropes. Okay, so I believe at my core that part of the reason why they'll do both House and Senate debates is because in order to manufacture consent, to show we fought the good fight and this is the best we could do and blah, blah, blah. Because Biden's got to come out here and it's awful. He should have written off student debt a long time ago. But this is going to drop a bomb on the whole country, where all these people, old people that went back to school after the global financial crisis that have these new student debt payments of $500 and more, guys like me with $800 a month kicking in, other stuff. This is going to be a major nuclear bomb on everyone's lives.
Yeah.
And so he has got to go in there and look like he's fought, coming out the other side knowing, well, in an effort to maintain our obligation to make payments that we, blah, 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 to cover the debt ceiling that we've already talked about before. This is a joke. This has always been a political tool to arm wrestle concessions from the other side.
Yeah.
And that's what's happening. And it's going to be hard because Biden screwed up and never listened to the people that understood what was causing the inflation. He allowed the narrative that they just printed wild money go on. Mm-hmm. So this is going to be the logical answer. I'm afraid that you're going to see tremendous amounts of austerity. I mean, one of the things that's in that bill is that 2024 SNAP payments are going to have a work requirement.
Yes, that's one of the things that the Republicans are pushing for in the House.
Yes, and this is something that if you go back to brother Bill Clinton, and his buddy Al Gore, when they reinvented government, they already destroyed welfare by putting a 5-year life max on it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
I mean, they destroyed single
Workfare,
mothers.
they called it.
Yes. So you can pretty much guarantee that when push comes to shove, that the Democrats will appear to put up a fight, and then there will be some compromise, which is going to be a compromise that hurts millions upon millions of families. And it's going to be right at the time of elections. And you already know, can you imagine, just jumping ahead, a debate between Joe Biden and Donald Trump at this point in time?
Oh, God.
Can
Oh,
you even
boy.
imagine
Yeah.
Donald Trump going, spit it out, Joe? Spit it out. Can't you get that sentence out, Joe? You know,
Yeah.
I mean, how are you going to
Oh, my
manage the
God.
country, Joe?
Oh, it's going to be a
Just say
train
it.
wreck of historic
No.
proportions.
And putting a work requirement on SNAP benefits at a time when the Federal Reserve is, we know, actively trying to throw people out of work, and also when we know this, supposedly really low unemployment rate is a fib because of all the different categories of people they allow themselves to ignore. It's so cruel. Right? It's so pointlessly cruel, again, in a country that generates and continues to have immense wealth. I mean, it's just like, what?
Yes.
It's immoral.
Well, I want you to get away from the wealth part for a minute and just think about the fact that our government literally is the cradle from Eden. It is the birthplace of the dollar. And if you think about that, this guy right here, this Congress right here, all of them right here could fix all of this without any problem. But guys like McCarthy are out there literally spewing lies about, we got to cut the debt, we got to cut the spending, this irresponsible spending and blah, 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 while simultaneously doing exactly what you said with the Fed raising interest rates. All of these things. This is the trinity of austerity that Clara Mattei speaks so eloquently about and has become kind of my call to arms here. Calling out that three-pronged austerity model, which is raising interest rates, cutting off the federal spending, and simultaneously ramping up the SAC or firing people, laying them off.
Yeah.
That is the three-pronged attack on labor, which is all of us. And it's going to impact all of us, except for those wealthy people that will still be on their freaking mega yachts, that will still be flying around just to go to a concert. They're going to be doing Coachella, you name, whatever. The Davos community is going to still live large. You'll see no break in their lives whatsoever. But the pain and suffering at the human level, at the regular people, at the worker level, is going to be biblical. And that, my friends, is exactly what I think you're going to see here.
Let's move on to this Coinbase issue. I'm interested to get your thoughts on this lawsuit that Coinbase has just filed against the SEC in federal court. It seems to me to be something of role reversal. Coinbase believes that the SEC will come after it soon, but Coinbase argues that the SEC does not have specific regulations to guide the crypto market. They're saying that the regulations that are in place now guide the stock market, and that the SEC hasn't specifically said whether or not those regulations ought to be aimed also at the crypto industry. How do you see this playing out? Will existing regulations be extended to crypto, or does this have to be hashed out in the courts? And, what does this mean for crypto investors?
Well, for investors, I can only tell you that if you weren't there early, you're going to be part of the pump and dump. But for the others, though, I think that the real story here is that the U.S. government, amongst others, right, there's a lot of work going on in ironing out things that had not been thought of. Just remember, laws are about 50 years behind technology. And so as we're dealing with all these changes in privacy and all these changes within algorithms and selling of information, you name it, I mean, there's so much that has to be worked out. And the crypto space, the interesting thing is crypto is not a real currency. No matter how many times somebody in the crypto world tries to tell you it is, it's not. It's like an envelope. And what it does is it carries fiat with it. It's propped up by fiat wherever you go.
Yes.
It's ultimately a way of hiding, if you will, state assets. It's a way of hiding U.S. dollars or Russian rubles or Chinese yuan or whatever. So in the end, it really it's a Ponzi scheme, and I hate to say it because I know people out there want it to be something more than that, but it is a Ponzi scheme right now. There's a lot of great opportunities that the left in particular could embrace and figure out ways of leveraging this, but what they're doing now is purely speculative. It's just one more way of creating more precarity, winners big, losers big. And it's one of those things that I foresee. I could honestly see someone making it illegal, but I think the SEC is working with a bunch of other groups, because remember, you've got the digital the federal digital currency, the CBDCs that they're looking at. They got Fed Now payments in the back end. These are not scary things. They're just things, right? They're just mechanisms.
Right.
The issue comes down to is that what do you see the value of having these speculative things out? And I'm telling you, I think they see it largely as a criminal enterprise. And I think there's evidence to back a lot of that up. And I think that they don't see a value. I think they see it destabilizing economics in general, because what it does is it takes money out of the economy. It takes it out of, and puts it somewhere. And ultimately, these guys are pulling more out. And it's huge amounts because people are just dumping money into this system, if you will, dumping real fiat cash into the system.
Yes.
And then at some point in time, when they want to cash out, they just pull that out. And so this has got a destabilizing effect overall on the economy in general. So to me, I think that there's going to probably be far less leeway, if you will, for crypto. Mm-hmm. And I think that they're probably going to implement some form of regulation specific to crypto. I know people that are working in this space. I don't have a current event on that. I don't have a current status on some of that. But I do know that there's tremendous amounts of work in that space right now from both what I would call the good guys, people that are trying to protect us from the predators, and the bad guys who want it as wild, wild west as could be so that they can make the most bank off of it.
Yeah.
And I know that's very much still going. So what the SEC does, I think that there's so much to be fought through. Actually, to be fair, people of good qualities on both sides of that are really taking it quite seriously. I don't know what's going to come from that, though. Like I said, I think the SEC as a whole, though, is probably slow playing that to try and figure out what's going to come from other efforts, and before they jump ahead and try and set precedent.
We're going to leave it there. That was the voice of Steve Grumbine. He's founder and CEO of the nonprofits Real Progressives and Real Progress in Action, and host of the podcast Macro and Cheese. He's also a leading activist and evangelist for modern monetary theory. You're listening to Political Misfits on Radio Sputnik. We'll take a short break and come right back. Stay tuned.